Okay, this is just going to be a quick one because this has been annoying me on Twitter ever since I saw it, and people are sort of not letting go of it, so I guess we have to have this talk. There's been a post going around on Twitter. I think the YouTuber Vanadrill has sort of been a part of playing with this, that Ambessa's run cycle is exactly the same as Shyvana's run cycle, right? It's just the same run cycle that's been reused multiple times. That's a little silly, haha. And some people are taking a little too far, saying like, oh, Riot is lazy, and some people are just sort of playing with it as like, oh, that's an interesting coincidence. Here's Katarina's run cycle. Here's Zed's run cycle. And the teachable moment here is that what you have here is a bunch of different animators working on these champions being presented with essentially the same challenge. We have this character who has two weapons attached to their hands. They need to run in a way that creates a distinguishable clear silhouette that also keeps their weapons on display, because for League of Legends specifically, having a character's source of power be visible as they're moving around is an important visual principle. And all that this really is essentially a form of convergent evolution. It's a bunch of different animators presented with the same problem, choosing to solve it in the same way. You can make the criticism, I suppose, that it would be more fun or more creative if Ambessa had a thoroughly unique run cycle, something that's completely specific just to her, right? And, yeah, sure. But let me riddle you this. What would you do with her weapons during the run cycle? How many options are there, really, for what you can do with them? Because you want to keep, is she going to hold both of them in front of her chest like this and run around like that? Or is she going to hold both of them out to the side? In which case she's going to be effectively, I guess, Naruto running, which, that might look a little bit silly, especially on Ambessa. What else would you do with her weapons specifically while she's running? What else would you do with Shyvana's weapons? Katarina's? Zed, I mean, it might make more sense for Zed to Naruto run, but that would also be a bit silly, right? That's a meme pose. What else would you do with it? You could have them pumping their arms, I suppose, but again, if the pose of this character is, I'm ready to enter combat at any time while I'm running, having them arm pumping while they're running around, that doesn't really feel like this character is ready for combat. That doesn't feel like a combat pose, whereas holding one weapon out in front of you and one back behind you, sort of defensively or in a way that suggests that you are ready to rumble, as it were, that feels a lot more like something that's combat ready. How many options are there exactly for this kind of animation? And if you pay closer attention, of course, their run cycles are not at all the same. Let's take a look at these from the side. You can see that Ambessa has a lot more play, a lot more elasticity. She's much better animated, quite frankly. There's a lot more sort of weight distribution, shifting, secondary motion going on with Ambessa. Let's actually slow it down even further. The way that, her torso compresses into the hip and sort of pushes up and down on this, sort of spring-like system as she's going. Shyvana, in her old ancient animation, doesn't really have that. You can see the character substantially less sort of flexible and interesting and dynamic to look at, because she was made at a very different time when League of Legends had different technical capabilities and different technical limitations. So this is this is a much less advanced run cycle, and you can see basically the same thing. Katarina is someone, I think she had a visual update a little bit after Shyvana was released, but you can see there's a little bit more advanced motion going on with the hip rotation into the torso there, and yet that still too is different from how Ambessa does it, right? There's not quite the same level of hip rotation with Ambessa as there is with Katarina, not exactly the same way. Right? Zed has a slightly different run cycle in that he has this, certainly from the side, rather silly, sort of hunched over forward run thing that he's got going on. That looks, I mean, it looks goofy from this angle. It was never supposed to be seen that way, but from the top down and from a decent distance, it gives him a sort of I am a ninja sneaking across Summoner's Rift kind of vibe. But yeah, these are not the same run cycle. They are all different run cycles, but the animators faced basically the same problem in trying to construct them, and they came up with similar solutions. But yeah, if I'll shit on Riot all day long for lack of creativity in many, many aspects, but this is just seriously, ask yourself, how else would you have her hold her weapons while she's running? There is the option of having her put them away, like on her hip or whatever. Like with Katarina, for example, the option of her stowing her knives on her hip while she's running, not holding them all the time. That might be more interesting, certainly for a Katarina update, if she wasn't just holding her knives in her hands all the time. That might make a little bit of sense for her specifically, because she's someone who draws her knives and throws them really quickly, right? Like that's her primary thing. But like, there just isn't that much else you can do, especially when the character has the weapons attached to their hands. Like, Shyvana can't just put her weapons away, right? Neither can Ambessa. There just isn't that much else you can do with characters in this situation. So, like, yes, it's an interesting observation that's worth making, because it brings you to, like, one of the problems that's central to the discipline of animation. How do you solve for a certain set of communication problems? At some point, you narrow it down to only a small number of options, right? That's interesting. That's an interesting place to go. Not so interesting to sort of go, oh, it's lazy because of uncreative. Riot can't be bothered to come up with anything better. It's like, is that really what it is? Are you sure about that? Because I don't think that's what it is.